Hi, everyone. We'll give about 1 minute for now, just to try and get everybody where they should be. I know that there was some great chat going on in the lounge, which is really exciting. I honestly think that this is the best that the lounge has been used. So it was super to see all the full tables, and I hope that you've made some great connections and that you've remembered to swap your business cards if you know how to do that. So you can go up to your notifications and it says exchange, or click on the little grey man. He's got lots, it's probably a lady actually, who knows, but it's got lots of functionalities there. You can invite people, you can exchange your business cards. It's the little grey circle on the right hand side above the red one. And you can also take your selfie, and we would love you to take your selfie. And as long as it's appropriate, as I said on my table just now, listening to the stories about social media, I would imagine there are some quite hairy ones. But post it on the social media profile of your or platform of your choice, or your preferred one. So as we are trying very hard to keep to time, because we've got some fantastic speakers and we want to give everybody an equal opportunity, I just want to say that the presentation with the technical hitch, we will be getting it recorded and we will be sharing that with you. So we'll do everything we can to ensure that you haven't missed out on those fantastic words of wisdom that I know were going to be shared. It was one of those presentations where you wanted to learn more, I think. And this is going to be another one of those. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Grant. Grant and I actually go back a long time, and he was a student or a new working person, and came to a SAFEX conference long ago. And he then volunteered to mentor some students at an annual conference, which was terrific. And now here he is speaking to all of you. So it makes me particularly proud and pleased and all the rest of it. He's had a fantastic career thus far, through a lot of hard work, a lot of connecting, brilliant personal brand, all those things that we hear about. I've actually watched Grant do it. So he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. He's also very, very clever, understands all the technical nuances of supply chain management, but has had some fantastic opportunities to travel, to experience different industries, different people, and now is on a particularly special journey from a South Africa perspective, is that he's now working for ASCM, which is the Association for Supply Chain Management, which is one of our partners, our international partners. So we're really excited to have a true South African in the American house, which really makes it a truly global organization. So good luck to you, Grant, in your new adventure, and we look forward to hearing your pearls of wisdom this morning. Take it away.
Jenny, thank you so much. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. And thank you so much to SAFEX for not only this opportunity, but as Jenny had mentioned, the opportunities for the last 15 years. I was exactly where a lot of you are right now, sitting in a conference, and just really gleaming as much as I could from the speakers in the conference at the time. And the journey with SAFEX has been incredible. So if you are attending this conference for the first time and you don't know much about the organization, or maybe you're not a member yet, or not, haven't gone through any of the trainings and things like that, please consider it, because it's such a worthwhile endeavor. But today, in the interest of time, because I tend to sometimes take a bit long on the presentation, so I want to make sure there's enough time for questions as well, because I think we're about 8 minutes in already. So let me quickly just talk to you about planning today. So we're going to look at what is planning, first of all. What is backward-looking versus forward-looking analysis? And this is where I want to draw a distinction when we think about planning in this context. And then one of the aspects that's linked to planning is risk identification and risk management, looking ahead into the future. So some of the things to consider when we think of the word planning or supply chain planning is really about the seamless flow of activities across the entire supply chain. It's really about understanding what is it that the customer or the consumer wants and needs, or what do we think that they need, and how do we transfer that information back throughout the entire supply chain. Most of you will probably be part of an organization currently, or maybe you're a student just entering the workplace. But it's an extremely important concept to know beyond just the operations or the execution of functions within supply chain, but how do we anticipate what's going to happen in the future? It's also really about better relationships with suppliers and with customers, making sure we communicate effectively with either ends of the chain, helping us to create visibility. That visibility then helps us to reduce risk that we could see in the future and try to predict or plan what the market might need. We want to create transparency, right? Be able to see what's going to happen. Nothing should be surprising for us, or at least minimize the amount of surprises that we get in our supply chains. Part of this really about planning is ultimately, if we plan better, we have a more likely opportunity to reduce the cost in our process. So there's a real impact in planning more effectively as far as possible. Hopefully most of you will know this kind of a process already. So it's called S&OP, Sales and Operations Planning, or SIOP, Sales, Inventory and Operations Planning. Really, there's a number of elements here, and this is a key process that typically accompanies a supply chain plan or forecasting endeavor. So looking at what it is that we have on the portfolio of products, this normally comes from marketing, saying these are the products that we sell, right? This is what's coming up in the future. We might have a new variant of a product that we sell in the coming 3 months because there's a new product development process or an R&D process or innovation process, which has determined that we need something new. So what is it that we plan on selling, right? That list of SKUs or stock keeping units, what are those things and how are we going to incorporate them into the portfolio of products that we have? The second step is understanding demand. So what do we think consumers are going to want, right? How much, where are we going to want it? What's the cost of it? And from their cost perspective, the price of it, and what does that look like from a value and a volume perspective? We then need to anticipate that demand and support the demand with supply. Okay, so what is it then that we're going to be purchasing from our suppliers, as well as what are we going to be manufacturing if we're a manufacturing organization to support that demand? Ideal scenario is we make exactly what we need for the demand that we think we're going to have. We know that we are always going to be wrong with a forecast, so therefore we're going to have inventory in between that to obviously mitigate any of the ups and down swings that we see in that demand into the future. The next step is then to develop action plans. So this is where that balancing function comes in, and this is the true planning component of supply chain. When we look at demand and we look at supply, if we see a gap between those two, and let's say we're unable to support the demand that's coming up in the next coming months, or we think that there's a risk we may not be able to, that's where we put in the action plans up front to help us to mitigate some of those risks into the future. Normally, this process will have a SIOP level or executive level meeting at the end that would really just refine and confirm the plans that are in place and take the actions then to ensure that those plans are implemented. Okay, so we can talk in a lot of detail about SIOP, right? This is a 5-day course, right? But definitely a lot to this. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on the slide because I do want to make sure we get to everything today. But this is first looking at KPIs or key performance indicators from a backward-looking perspective, right? So at the top there, you can see we have the supplier side, the sourcing, manufacturing, make, deliver, and then the customer or consumer at the very end of the supply chain. So this is a typical supply chain, right? Yes, all supply chains are different, and there's going to be nuances in all of them. Some of them may not even have all these steps, but in general, this is what it looks like. So what are some of the key performance indicators that we want to understand when we look at things that already have happened, right? So if we look at the right-hand side there, perfect order fulfillment is an example of a KPI. How did we perform to our customer, right? Did we give them products on time? Was it in full? Was it the right amount? How was the quality of the product that we delivered? And was the documentation of the shipment correct as well? Those are things that have already happened. And we can see from an analysis like that, where we might have gaps. Maybe it's with specific products or specific customers that we may have a gap, for example, in our delivery or our ability to deliver to the customers what it is that they need. CSI, Customer Satisfaction Index, is a very good one to use as well. What do our customers think of us, right? Beyond just the hard KPIs, it's also that perception of how our customers see us. So very important KPIs that we could look at there. Forecast accuracy is another really interesting one, and of course, a very relevant one to do, because we're obviously looking at the historical view of, we said we were going to sell a certain amount. How much did we actually sell, and what was the variance within that? FG is finished goods. So once we manufactured a product, the finished goods days cover. How much cover do we have from an inventory perspective? And do we have inventory that we can actually sell? So inventory health can refer to things like, is this inventory near expiry? Maybe it could be damaged. What are the other factors that we need to consider with the inventory that we want to sell, but that we have right now? Okay. So not to go into all the detail of those KPIs, but we then do what's called root cause and corrective action. So RC, root cause, CA, corrective action. Really, it's pointless to do RC if you don't do CA, right? We need to be able to take an action from everything that we determine. So these are some of the questions that we might want to ask ourselves once we see these backward-looking KPIs. Things like, why does our customer not like us? Maybe they gave us a bad rating on the CSI. Or why didn't we send our customer the goods at the expected service level? Why are we losing sales? What's the lost sales percentage that we've seen in the past? Why is it that we have so much stock? This is a very common one. I see this in many businesses where it's either a very big mix difference. So we have a lot of the things we don't need, and we don't have enough of the things we do need, right? So we're both out of stock and overstocked at the same time. These are the kind of questions we want to ask ourselves. Okay. And then let's look at this now from a forward perspective. So this is where the planning comes in really, really strongly, is these activities or these things have not happened yet, okay? But we want to now know, based on the future, what it is that we think is going to happen. So the one on the very right-hand side there is a good one to use. Potential lost sales or potential lost profit. This could really refer to, okay, we're looking months ahead into our forecast, and we're seeing that there's a risk of us not being able to support the demand that we think we're going to get. How much lost sales does that result in, and what is the profit loss on that? We can take that even a step further, and in many organizations that have worked, we look at it down to profitability level, right? Profitability level by brand, by product, very specifically looking at those details around what the risk actually is quantified into the future. If you look on the left-hand side there, most of the time, the impact on that risk is that we may have a constraint in material. This is a point that comes up a lot, is manufacturing, the constraints in manufacturing versus the constraints in supply. Usually, the lead time is longest on the supply side versus the manufacturing side. So let's say we have no inventory available at a certain point in time. We will say, okay, we need to turn on the tap and make more stuff. So if we have the material available to put into the manufacturing process, the raw materials and the packaging materials, we can easily manufacture that within maybe a couple of days or a week. But if we don't have the raw material available, that's a months-long process to actually place an order now and then wait for that order to come in. So definitely that constraint typically sits on that side. Again, we want to now ask ourselves questions looking forward. Based on what we know and what we think we're going to be doing in the future, what are the plans that we can use to mitigate some of that risk? Okay. And I'm going to take you to the next slide to talk a little bit about that risk. So first of all, when we think of what risks we could be having in the future, okay, there's things like the company reputation, the consumer perception of us, how does that potentially impact us? Civil unrest, we know this very well in South Africa. Civil unrest activities, anticipation of some of that, anticipation of strike action, those kinds of things which can definitely impact supply chains, as we know very well. The raw material supply shortages for a variety of reasons, climate-related risks, so the natural disasters and things like that, product safety, disease and infestation, just to name a very small portion of risks that you actually could have. So you'd want to actually look at your future and say, what do we think is going to happen in the future of our supply chain and of our forecast, and try and mitigate some of these things. You may have seen this already. So this is a risk matrix, very simplified version of it, but really looking at, if we take one of these risks into the future, what is the likelihood of it happening? And then what is the impact of that risk on our business? So for the likelihood, and I've seen this being done in a few organizations, where they'll take a sort of a high, mid, and a low forecast, for example, and say, okay, we think that the range is going to be somewhere in between these two extremes. That gives them at least a leeway to say, okay, great, this is the possibility or the probability with a reasonable amount of variance that this risk could actually happen, right? The impact is then going to be important, because if it's a very high impact to our business, we really want to try and mitigate that risk completely. If it's very low, then maybe don't do anything, right? Maybe we accept the risk that could come into the future and just say, great, that's how we're gonna handle this now going forward. So definitely it's about identifying those future risks that we could see, giving a likelihood score, and ensuring we understand what the impact is going to be of those, or potentially could be. Okay. So at this point, I do want to say that when we look at the plan for the future and incorporate these risk activities, there's always going to be a sense of we're going to get it wrong. Okay. We will get it wrong. But imagine we had no plan. That's even worse, because everything is going to catch us by surprise. So it's really better to have the plan, and we know that there might be some leeway on that plan. And then what is it that we can do about it? So I thought of this in terms of what would be our best option, and then what would actually be our last resort, just based on experience of our own working in these types of environments. So the first thing that we could do, let's say we have a risk, and let's call a specific risk out. So let's say the risk is that we don't have enough stock to support a launch of a new product which is happening in 3 months. We don't have the raw material, and it's a problem, right? The first thing we can try and do is align with the supplier. So ensure that the supplier knows what it is that we plan to do in the future to get them to help us, right? So that communication with them, sharing of forecasts, sharing of supply plans with the suppliers to ensure that they know what we're doing in our business. The next thing we could do, if that doesn't work, is try for a different source of supply or a manufacturing alternative. So now we can start planning ahead, right? Remember, this thing hasn't happened yet. So we still have an opportunity potentially to actually go ahead and do these things. We can ask around, right? Try to find a different source of supply, try to get this product made somewhere else if we cannot do it ourselves. The next thing that we could do is demand shaping. Okay, so demand shaping is really about saying, okay, we have this risk. We're not going to have the stock available for these SKUs. How are we going to still make our profit this year? So we may want to look at things like price changes. We would say, okay, let's do a promotion of a specific type of product that we might not have done before had we not had the specific risk. So maybe shift the demand of what a consumer would have bought into something else through various levers like price, like promotional activity, like advertising, etc. And then at the very last step, what we could do, which is not ideal, but of course, if we know there's a risk coming, better to do this than not, is rationing and prioritization. So let's ration what we sell to our customers, right? We have a finite amount of product available, for example. How do we ensure that everybody gets at least some, or we put those products into the most profitable channels, as an example of what we could do here as well. Okay, and of course, the best thing to keep in mind is to continue with the S&OP or similar type of process, because this is where you identify these things on a consistent basis. Normally that happens monthly. Okay, I think many of you will probably be part of some kind of S&OP, but normally it's on a monthly process, and that needs to be robust enough to really continuously review, assess the historical KPIs, what went wrong and what can we do in the future, and what are the risks into the future, and how do we mitigate those when we get into that future state. So lastly, and this goes back to our original question about what is planning, and I wanted to put this in a more visual view, right? So this is, I mean, there's various ways to show this, but how I like to see it is really to see sales, inventory, and production or supply on the same graph. So we now know, let's say we are here at the end of March, okay, in this example. We have some actual sales that we've done for the first 3 months of the year, and now we're anticipating what it is that we think we're going to be doing for the rest of the year. We're looking at things like how much cover of inventory do we need versus how much we actually have or actually will have, right? Looking at the inventory on hand, plus the supply that's coming in, less the sales that are going out consistently for the remainder of the period. And remember, we need to look at this at a SKU level as well. So breaking it down into those details so that we can see where the risks are and we can really manage the business effectively like this. Looking at something like this is step one. Next step is to get the involvement of the different components of the business, the marketing team, the sales team, ensuring we work with the suppliers and also even the customers. But really, we want to try and get out of the zone of only thinking about what's happening within this month or within the next month as supply chain people. We need to be thinking about the future always. SNOP typically defines a 12 to 18 month period. And then you even get further than that when we go into integrated business planning, which is an even more advanced concept that would look at probably a 24-month period, incorporating some of the strategic elements of the business as well. So I wanted to just give you a brief overview of this. I know there's a lot of steps in here. I hope it just gives you a view of the importance of planning and seeing the impact that you can have if we just look ahead and we see what it is that we think are going to be risks into the future. I know we have a bit of time left, so let me check if there are any questions at this point from anyone. And Jenny, you'll have to help me with this because I can only see my screen on the side.
Okay. Hi, Grant. Great presentation, and you're doing really well time-wise. Thank you very much. Has anyone got questions? I know that Sianda's found your presentation really interesting and is requesting that we can have your slides afterwards. And just remember, everybody, that the presentation is, let's put you back to the presentation. I don't want to see me full screen. That the presentation is being recorded. So, and I love, Deborah Dull, who I'm going to quote a couple of times during this event. She talks about how everything is inventory. And for me, that kind of, she plays games where she goes to stores and she, instead of buying the customary one thing, she'll buy two and then see how the store replenishes it, whether she goes back in a week and sees whether they have or not, which I think is a bit sad, but it's also exactly what you're kind of talking about, which is if you don't plan it properly and you don't manage it properly, then the things are a problem. And risk obviously has been something that we've all had to deal with.
Yeah, and talking a little bit more into that concept of inventory, it's a concept that sometimes is missed, right? And really having an inventory policy for every type of SKU that we have or every product, location, depending on how we've segmented the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to know, because a lot of the time you'll see, okay, we need to have this million rand worth of inventory. For me, it's not about the rand number. It's about the coverage. So we're thinking of this from a supply chain perspective. We need to be able to support the demand of a consumer at a certain point in time with enough inventory to support, but also to keep it low enough that we don't spend too much money on it. Mm-hmm. But the policy is really important there, and that's that in-between component, really between demand and supply, and then between supply and our suppliers. There's always that inventory step that fits into there.
Yeah, so we've got questions coming in now. It's always the case, right? In the last minute, they come flooding in. Well done for asking. Don't be shy. Remember, put your questions in. No question is a stupid question. Please remember that. Honestly, I mean that. Rivash is asking, I'm involved in manufacturing planning. Any tips on raw material expediting?
Yeah, I think from what you're talking about now, Rivesh, is you're thinking of this from an execution point of view. What I would suggest is think of this from a future plan perspective. Share with your supplier what it is that you think you need, right? Give them that forecast on a monthly basis. So if you have your demand plan, right, what are we going to sell to the customers? Translate it into some kind of a supply plan and say, or first a manufacturing plan, how much we're going to need to produce, and then a supply plan, how much do we therefore need to procure from a raw material perspective. The best way is to really share that with them on an ongoing basis. And I would recommend having a monthly touch point with those suppliers with the numbers in hand, saying, what did we do this month? What do we anticipate is going to happen within the next 6 to 12 months, every month? Because then you can plan ahead and they can tell you if there are going to be any potential risks. Let's rather not spend the money on expediting. Let's rather get the product in when we need it, hopefully. And if we have to expedite, absolutely, then that's something we got to do as an ad hoc. But I would recommend that definitely if that's not something you're already doing.
Great answer. Thank you. I hope that helps. Tim is asking, and this is a big question, is there, in your opinion, a specific piece of technology that will change the planning and forecasting space in the next few years?
Mm-hmm. I mean, very, very interesting question. And actually, it's like kind of, we're all searching for the silver bullet. You know, how can we get this done better? How can we help planning? There are many, many planning tools out there. There's many collaborative tools with suppliers, you know, ERPs and things that link into suppliers, link into customers. What I would say is that we want to understand the process first, right? Let's get the processes right in our organization and support those with enabling systems and tools. A really nice concept to look at is DDMRP, which is demand-driven materials requirements planning. Maybe some of you have heard of that before. There is definitely a lot of good things in that model to think about, and that's more of a process or a structure, but definitely a good thing to do. But yes, I think that the primary starting point before we even talk about systems and tools is what is our process and how do we ensure that information is shared, what is shared, and then support that with an enabling system.
Great, yeah, good. Technology is part of the issue. And Rivash, again, you obviously gave him a good answer the first time. How do we deal with time constraints of international RM imports and the delays it causes for production without increasing our working capital?
Yeah, it's also a good question and extremely common, Ravesh. I mean, looking at like port delays for raw materials and the customs and things like that. Definitely, there's many things you can do. There's a couple of options on the supply side. I mean, so you could look at having an agreement with that supplier of raw materials and say, could you hold a certain percentage for us? Would that be a possibility of some kind to hold on their side, right? Then obviously to make sure that we plan our lead times effectively and look at the variability of the lead time. So it's quite a funny thing, and I've seen this happen in a lot of organizations where a salesperson will say, when will the stock be here? And the supply chain will say, oh, it's going to be here next week, Friday. But really the answer they've given is, well, we'll be at the port next week, Friday. What the salesperson is asking is, when will it be in the warehouse available to sell? So we also need to know the full lead time, understand that lead time, and plan around the variability of that. So we should be able to look at historical deliveries that we've received. What was the expected lead time of those deliveries, and when did we actually receive it, and incorporate that into the plan. This is exactly what we're talking about with that future plan, saying, okay, if we're looking at now August in this graph here, what is the risk of us not receiving that stock in time, right? And what could we do differently at this point now to ensure that we do that?
Yeah, great answer. And also just such a good example of how every department needs to understand what the other department is doing, and that proper communication doesn't make way for misunderstanding. So really cool. Thank you, Grant.
Easier said than done, for sure. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a small organization and we fail sometimes too. Brilliant. And as always, and I'll say this every single time that I chair a session in a supply chain conference, I love it because supply chain professionals keep to time. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, everybody. Please let's show Grant some emojis and some whatevers. I'd be doing lots of love hearts. Look, that's not even me. So thank you very much. Great advice. Sorry, great advice and great content, and just really nicely delivered. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for the questions, super questions. So enjoy the and Volition has reared some. I've just seen Zanola in the chat. So Volition colleagues and great products from the organisation. They should be very proud. All right, take care. Thank you very much, Grant. And I'll see everybody in the next presentation, which is all about sustainability, the important topic. So I know Zanola will be there. All right, thanks, Grant. Take care.